have a recording of it. And I'm also going to share my screen with you guys because there's no reason for you to sit here and look at my ugly mug for an hour. You don't all need to do this, but can a couple people just give me thumbs up if you can see my screen? Actually, hold on. Let me do it a little differently. Let me share this screen. All right, sorry. Now, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Perfect. Thank you, Faith and other folks. All right, let's distribute this in a nice way here so that we can everybody. I'll look at you. This is going to be counterintuitive, but I'll look at you guys up here and at my work there. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, everybody, I'm going to slowly start ramping up. I'll give the stragglers another minute or two to drift in, but for those of you good people who are here on time, there's no reason we can't kind of get started. We are going to be talking today about the SAT and ACT, all aspects of it. We're going to spend a little bit of the time today talking about some logistics in terms of when you should be taking these tests, who should be taking these tests. Usually, if you are here in a Zoom meeting talking about this, then probably that means you should do it. But we'll get into that. And so I'll spend some time talking about just logistics. What is the place of these tests in the pandemic? Excuse me. Good thing we're not doing this in person because apparently everyone's getting sick here in June. What is the place of these tests in this sort of post-pandemic era? And we'll also spend some time talking about how you can actually improve on them. And in fact, that'll be a place I start in a minute. But let me first start by formally welcoming all of you. Thank you guys for being here. This is a great group, especially for a June. I'm impressed. You guys are awesome. I hope to also give you guys some good game plans about what to do over the summer. I am Paul Jury. I'm the founder of PJ Test Prep. Yes, I am the P in PJs, not what my 7-year-old does when he wets the bed. But I am the founder of PJ Test Prep, guys. And as a giant test nerd, I hope to share some of my test nerdosity with you guys today. And if there's one theme that I'm hoping we can get across today, it's that the more you understand about these silly tests and kind of how they work, the less intimidating the whole entire process can be. So as a way of proving that to you, I hope, I don't know if you guys have the handout downloaded that we sent out, but I'm going to be sharing it on the screen and it'll be available on the recording and stuff afterwards if you want it, or you can always just email me, by the way. I think my email is just here at the top. Yeah, just shoot me an email if you're like, hey, I didn't get the handout and I would like to have a copy of it. But I'm actually going to start you guys off with a real life test question. We're going to look at the science one here. Let me doctor up my screen so that it'll be easy to show and I have lots of room for you to write. Let me show you guys how an ACT question works that not only just throws you into the fire of this test prep thing, but also it gets across the theme, which is, again, that the more you understand about how this test works, the easier the whole thing is. So this is from the science section of the ACT. And the first thing I want you guys to know about the science section of the ACT, which echoes across all different content areas of both tests, is that there's not actually very much, if any, science content on these tests. Now, for the math, yes, there are a few math things you have to know, although it's not calculus. It's mostly just algebra 1 and some geometry. For the science, there's actually no science content at all. So actually, the section's not even called science. It's called the science reasoning section. And it is not science. It's just graph reading. And that's what makes it easy. But of course, it doesn't seem easy at first. When you look at any given science graph on the ACT, you're going to be confronted with some science chart or little graph here that you've never seen before. What the heck is a facies? I'm not a plate tectonic geologist. I don't know what this is. That's okay. remember, it's totally unfair for them to actually test science content on the ACT because science curriculums vary wildly across different schools. Some schools that are very, like STEM heavy might require you to take chemistry or bio in 10th grade. Other schools that are like arts schools might not even make you take chemistry at all. So how can they be like, hey, how many electrons are there in a boron atom? Because like one nerd at some polytech school memorized the periodic table yesterday and knows that. And the rest of us are like, what? You're a boron. And so they don't ask any science content on this test. What they do is they give you weird science graphs that nobody has seen before so that we're all on equally clueless footing. What you do is you just look at the graph without trying to worry about what the science is saying. Just understand the axes and get the basic idea of what's going on in the graph. For instance, I usually like to start with the axes. Notice here how we have temperature starting low and then slowly getting higher. So like it's real hot over here, not so hot over here. So if they asked you about like the temperature of facies F, you'd be like, it's really hot. It's like 700 and higher, up to 1,000, versus facies C is like much cooler. So maybe C is for cool. I don't know. And then they ask you on these side axes about depth, which gets bigger the more you go down. You know how depth works. And then over here we've got pressure, which you might know this science. You might actually have been like, oh yeah, the further I went down scuba diving that one time, the more pressurized it got. Oh yeah, pressure and depth do correlate. You don't even need to know that though, because it literally says so right on the graph. So once you get the basic idea of the graph, even if you have no idea what facies E, or in the case that we're being asked about facies G, if you have no idea what that is, it doesn't matter. You just point at it and you say, well, what do you want to know about facies G? It's right here. It'll most likely form under which of the following pressure and temperature conditions? Well, facies G like lots of different temperatures, everything from 200 on up. So that's not particularly helpful. But when we talk about temperature, guys, what kind of temperature does facies G want? Excuse me, I meant to say pressure. What kind of pressure does facies G want? Does it want not very much pressure, like 0, 2, or 4? Or does it want lots of pressure, like 10, 12, 14? Well, it wants lots of pressure, right? Like more than 10. And so the answer is J. Like the only one of these it can be is J, because J is the only one with pressure that's higher than 10. It's got 11. And, if you wanted to get real picky, you could trace where like, oh, where does, 11 kBs is like right here. Where does that hit 600 degrees? Oh, right by the G in facies G. So yeah, that tracks. But that's all we're doing here, guys. Yes, that passage looks really confusing at first. You probably have never seen that stuff before, but that doesn't matter. Honestly, half of what these tests are testing is, can you be brave enough to see some weird thing that you're not very familiar with and still do it anyway? Now, with the math and with the grammar, it's like a little bit more. There are a few things you have to know, like, yeah, you do need to know how to multiply on the math test of the SAT or the ACT. You do need to know the Pythagorean theorem, although on the SAT, at least, they give you the Pythagorean theorem in the formula bank at the beginning. But it's more like, we're going to give you this weird shape, but it's got a triangle in it. Can you just recognize that all it is a disguised triangle and then use the Pythagorean theorem? It's honestly a bravery test as much as it's anything else. And it's also a test that's the same every freaking time. And that's the other lesson that I want you guys to get out of this, is that the SAT and the ACT are very, very learnable. They are the same test every time. They have to be. Like, why do these tests even exist in the first place? Well, it's because grades aren't always very consistent from school to school. One school might be really easy to get a 4.0. Other school might be really hard to get a 4.0. Two kids who have 4.0s, if they're not familiar with their high school, how do they pick one and not the other? Well, if one kid took the SAT and got a 1300 and the other kid took it and got an 800, maybe that would give them some idea. But they can't do that unless those two kids at different high schools took the same test. If they didn't take the same test, then they can't really compare them very well. So it has to be the same test, not only across areas, but across test times too. So if you take the test coming up in August, guess what? You're going to see basically the same test again in October, which is why you can learn it, and which is why I have a company helping people learn how to do this test. It's like playing the same board of a video game over and over again. You almost can't help but get better at it. So today we're going to talk again about the logistics of these tests. What are they being used for right now? Should I take it? When should I take it? Which test should I do? The SAT or the ACT, stuff like that. And then I'll spend a little bit more time giving you guys some test prep tips in order to get you through things. So first of all, you can see some of the what your scores mean and recommended schedule stuff. But I'm gonna actually just jump right to what most people are asking these days, which is, what is the deal with the test optional world? And where are we now? Do I have to take the SAT? So I'm going to start by showing you something from the second page of our handout that I think is a pretty good it tells the story a little bit right now. So right now there are 3 things that schools can do regarding SATs or ACTs. They can require them, which is what almost every school did before the pandemic. They can be completely test blind. They can give double middle fingers to the test and say, no, we're not going to accept this. Even if you send it to us, we just don't care about the SAT or the ACT. Or they can be test optional. That's the yellow group. Guess where most colleges still are? Look at this giant Pac-Man eating a peanut butter and booger sandwich here. Most schools right now, for about to be seniors who are getting ready to start their applications over the summer, most schools are test optional. Why? Isn't the pandemic over? Well, tell that to somebody who has COVID still. Yeah, I mean, as far as the pandemic worries and stuff, yeah, we don't really need to worry about test centers being closed and stuff anymore. But colleges have been slow to return to the test, not because they don't like it or they don't see value in it necessarily. Some schools don't like the test so much, but because schools have been given this really interesting sort of longitudinal study where they had a group of kids who had to take the SAT for 4 years, and then suddenly this pandemic came around and said, nope, nobody can take the test for basically a year and a half. Nobody could really take it. And so nobody was requiring it then. And colleges are like, hold on, let's just rock this experiment a little bit longer. Let's see what happens with our 4 years of kids who didn't take the test versus our 4 years of kids who did. Is one group doing better? Is the group that didn't take the test doing better? Cool, then let's go test blind. Oh, wow, actually those kids are doing way worse. Let's go back to requiring it, and so forth. So most colleges have their pros and cons about the test. It definitely provides some benefit, but obviously just like all aspects of the admissions quadrant, tests do have their flaws. Most colleges are test optional. Okay, well, what does that mean for you? That means that it's not a bad idea to take the test for a lot of reasons I'll get into in a minute, but you probably don't have to. Unless you are applying to one of the not very many test requiring schools. If you're applying to MIT, you better take the SAT because you can't get in without it, or the ACT, your choice. Georgetown, basically every single school in Florida where there never was a pandemic, DeSantis land, they have never stopped requiring the SAT. Even during the pandemic, people were going and getting the pandemic, getting COVID at their SAT. If you're applying to schools like that, then yeah, obviously you need to take it. Now, counter, if you are only applying to UCs or Cal States, then you don't have to take the SAT because the Cal States and the UCs will not look at your SAT score. And in Southern California, where almost all of us are, that's a really big deal. Those are very important schools out here. I would remind you that they aren't the only schools. There are other schools. In fact, there are 8 UCs and 24 or so CUs, and then there's 1,400 other colleges. Some people are like, oh, well, I heard that no schools are requiring the SAT anymore. Nobody wants to see it. Like, is USC not a school? Is LMU not a school? Is Biola not a school? What about Pepperdine? What about Arizona or Washington, if you're willing to go out of state a little bit? Basically, everywhere else in the country is not taking as hardline a stance as California's university system. However, for some people, those are the only schools that they're applying to. And so if you're only applying to those schools and you are not applying to any scholarships that want the SAT or whatever, then you might not take it. For everybody else, and for most people, and honestly, these days, I'm going to talk a little bit about the UCs in a second, but the UCs are wild right now in terms of the GPAs you have to get into basically any of them. Cal States are a little bit more lenient, but some people are kind of hoping to go to a school that, well, I don't want to make fun of any Cal States. There's actually some really, really amazing Cal States too. But like sometimes people are like, oh, I was hoping to go to a UCLA type of place, or at least like UC San Diego level school. Well, have you ever gotten a B? Well, you better look somewhere else then, because these schools are nutto. And there's so many other great schools out there. Most people in SoCal, most people in LA usually end up, whether I recommend it or not, but I think this is a good thing to do. Yeah, apply to some UCs and some Cal States, man. There's some great ones, and they are a little bit cheaper on average. However, don't overlook the many, many, many other schools out there, and apply to some of those Common App schools as well, because they are accepting people also. And in an era where it's, there's a lot of competition over things, schools are lobbing money sometimes at people who have really good, sorry, I'm trying to find the person who the background noise is coming from and try to mute them. Oh, there we go. So, consider your options, guys. There's lots of really great schools that aren't UCs and Cal States also, although yes, definitely apply to those schools too. Okay, so let's say you're like, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. I'm going to apply to some UCs and Cal States, but yeah, also I might apply to Arizona or USC or Pepperdine or any of those other schools out there. Should I take the SAT? I would say probably it's at least worth an attempt, because here's the other thing that's going on right now. It used to be, and this is so funny how quickly things change, but 5 years ago, almost every school required the SAT, and so everybody took it. It was weird to not take the SAT. It was a strange thing. And so, it wasn't a special thing to do the SAT. You took it, you did the best you could on it. Suddenly, with all these schools going test optional, a lot of people just stopped taking it. And even schools that are test optional, depending on the school, you often get only 25, 30% of people submitting scores. And so suddenly submitting a score is like an extra credit bonus thing. Suddenly that's the unique thing that you're doing to help set you apart. And here's the other good news. If you take the test and you don't do super well on it, you don't do well enough to improve your GPA, you can always just not send it in to a certain school. You can send it into some schools and not others. So it's almost like an opportunity for an extra credit test that if you do well on it, it helps your chances of getting into colleges and accessing a lot of money. But also at the same time, you can just not use it if it doesn't go well. So a lot of students I'm seeing are, even if they took a few years off, are starting to head back towards the tests, because it can be a really interesting way to help set yourself apart. Okay, so I'll return to that front page in a second. Let me say a few more things about this. Some of it I've already covered. Some reasons you might take the SAT or the ECT. Part of it is that if you're a junior, you might not have your college application list finished all the way. And if you're a sophomore or a freshman, well, I'm sure you don't know where you're applying yet. So maybe you are applying to Georgetown. By the way, there are going to be more schools requiring the SAT next year. If you're not a junior right now, if you're just going to be a junior next year or the year after, inevitably, I think some schools probably will go test blind, but I think there's going to be more schools that start requiring it again, because gosh, with GPA only, it's just so tricky to determine the difference between 100,000 valedictorians. That's why all the UCs are so wacky right now. Like to get into San Diego, like UC San Diego, which is, a pretty good school, but not the one, it's not Berkeley, it's not UCLA, it's not the one that people are thinking of as like the headliner. You have to have a 4.3 to get into UC San Diego these days. You have to have a 4.25 to get into Santa Cruz, which is gorgeous, but it's the third easiest to get into UC. So if they're only going on GPA and you ever got an A-, it's tricky. And so having something else to differentiate you can be really helpful at the other schools. Your PSAT score, if you took that and maybe it wasn't super high, you may have seen some of the stats we saw earlier. Remember that whatever you've done so far doesn't really matter, because maybe you didn't really know what you were doing on the test. And if you prep a little bit for it and you take it again, you might score 200-300 points higher. We talked about this already. scholarships, also like the state schools competing with the UCs for price. You know, Arizona, if Arizona wants to get you because you have a decent GPA and a really good test score, they know that like if they're still trying to charge out-of-state tuition, you're not going to go there. You're going to go to a Cal State instead. So they're going to throw money at you to get down to the level of those other schools. I always try to say it like, yes, I know schools sound like they all cost $65,000 a year and stuff, but most schools don't actually cost that much. The actual average price that people are paying to go to schools hasn't actually increased very much in the past 30 years. Like, yeah, Stanford does cost $65,000 if you're super rich, but like, if you're not, it costs $15,000. It costs $18,000. It costs whatever it says it costs when they send you your financial aid package. So better to get into Stanford first and then figure out if you can afford it later. So think about that as well. There is some evidence, and I will say I'm a little skeptical of this because, you know, higher acceptance for those who do send in scores. Yes, it is true that schools are generally letting in more people who submit their scores, a higher percentage of. Hello, I'm going to mute folks here. If anybody has a question, just throw it in the chat and I'll do a Q&A thing at the end here. Yes, there is some evidence of that. However, there's some mitigating evidence of like, well, but aren't the people submitting their scores the ones with really high scores? Like most people aren't submitting an 850 anymore. They're submitting their 1500. And yeah, and that's true as well. So it's hard to tell how true that is. But I will say, I have not heard of a single school where submitting a score, as long as it's, you know, helpful to your grades, hurts you. I haven't seen that. So, you know, err on the side of taking it. Like I said, what's the downside? You wasted a Saturday morning and you just didn't submit it. So think about that. Somebody asked in the chat, what GPA do you need to get into UC Riverside? UC Riverside is the second easiest one to get into in terms of GPA, at least. Although it's still a great school. I think they have the #1 social mobility rating of like any school in the country. But let's look it up. Let me just get that stat out here for you because you can Google this. UC Riverside average GPA. 3.83. So yeah, it's a little more realistic. Everything above Riverside is going to be at least a 4.0, and this is weighted. But hey, you maybe could have gotten a B or two and still get into Riverside. If you got a C, probably not. No, it always depends. Obviously, there's more to your package than that, but with the Cal States also, they don't even have essays. And so it's literally just your GPA. They're only looking at that. And I personally think that you are more than just your GPA. There are other numbers to you as well and other pieces of information. So, you know, think about applying to a diversity of schools. Let's leave it at that. Okay, so if I have sold you on reasons to take the SAT or ACT, at least to give it a try. By the way, if you're not sure you want to pay the the fee to actually go to take the SAT, because you're not sure you want to pay the $60, you can also just go and take a free one. There's more information about this later on our website, but pjtestprep.com, our website, has a page called Free Tests and Seminars. They're not always free. I will say sometimes they cost $5, so it's basically free. But if you go to this page, you can see that like on June 9th, for instance, we have a practice test coming up where we have, you're going to come in and you're going to take a real actual SAT and see how you score, or a real ACT, or heck, come to 2 of them and do 1 of each. And then you can see what the difference is between the 2. But come in and take one with us, and then you can look and say, oh yeah, I have a 4.1 GPA, but I only got a 21 on my ACT. Okay, well then, you know, you can probably raise that up to a 24 or 25, but if you have a 4.0, that's probably not going to help. Or if you're like, hey, I got a 3.6, I got a couple dings on my GPA, you know, the pandemic and all that, and I got a 25 on my ACT without really even trying or knowing what I was doing. I could get that up to a 28 or 29. Man, now I'm going to get in all kinds of schools that my GPA alone wouldn't have allowed. So then you can make, you know, a plan on when you might actually take the test based on. Okay, so let's say that you're thinking of actually doing the test. As again, if you're here on a seminar, I probably don't have to talk to you into this too strongly. let's talk about when you might take it. Just a quick poll here. Can you give me a thumbs up if you are currently a junior and you're about to finish your junior year and become a senior next year? Who's in that group? Okay, a few of you guys. Okay, cool. A fair amount of you. That's what I expected. All right, take those thumbs down. Anybody here a sophomore or a freshman? Okay, a couple of sophomore and freshmen. Got a junior coming in the chat. Okay, cool. All right, cool. So we got a mix. Let me just reduce this to a simpler equation then. If you are a junior, you should probably take the test as soon as you can. June is already passed. That SAT was Monday, 2 days ago. There is an ACT this weekend, but it's probably too late to sign up for it. Wait for the summer or the fall. August, there's an SAT in August. You can prep over the summer and take that August test. There is a ACT in September. If you're going to be a senior, you can do it then. If you want to take either test, they offer both of them in October. That is a fine time to do it as well. That's usually early enough for most deadlines. A few schools have early application deadlines and stuff that are before that, but usually schools will allow you to submit a score later, even if you already sent in your application. So usually October is fine for most schools as well, because they haven't made a decision on you yet. November, there's an SAT. In December, there's both. That's fine for some schools. It's a little late for others. Waiting until the new year as a senior is probably too late, because most deadlines have already happened at that point. But that's what I'd recommend for those of you who are juniors. Those of you who are sophomores or freshmen, you guys can usually wait until spring of junior year. And the short answer is, if you are not yet a junior and you have some more time on this, the short answer is spring of junior year is a really good time to take these tests. Your brain is all buff from taking 19 APs, and you can get it done by the end of your junior year and focus on more important things over the summer, like going to parties and writing your college application essays and stuff like that. So, consider that as a good time to take it. You can take it in March or April or February, and then retake it in May or June, and then just have it done. Now, I should say, for this year's sophomores, for those who are about to be juniors, you guys have a really cool and interesting opportunity here to take the current format of the SAT in August, September, November, December, and then turn around and take the new format, the digital version, in March or May or June. So current sophomores about to be juniors, what would that make you? 25 graduates? You guys have a really cool situation where you can actually do both formats and then just use whichever one you do better on. So those who are wondering what I'm talking about with this new digital format, you may have heard that starting with the PSAT in the fall and then proceeding with the March and further SATs, the SAT is going fully digital. Now, what's going to be the same is you're still going to get a score out of 1600. You're still going to show up at some test center someplace, perhaps at your school, and you're still going to take a long ass boring test, and it could be used in conjunction with your grades. But it's now going to take place on a computer as opposed to on paper. And it's shorter. Instead of being 3 hours, it's only going to be 2 hours now. It's still going to test both math and verbal, and you'll get a score up to 800 about both. It's still going to have more or less the same types of questions on it. I've been studying the new format, obviously, because we're going to have to start teaching that soon. There are some differences, though. It's shorter because they're switching to computer adaptive format, like the graduate school tests have, where the questions change a little bit based on how you do. If you get a lot of questions right, your second batch of questions, basically there's two batches. You get a batch of math questions, like about 10 of them. And if you do really well, then you get a second batch that's kind of harder. If you do really poorly, then you get a batch of questions that's a little easier, but you're sort of slotted into certain score ranges. It's very complicated. It's very weird. We'll answer more questions about this in the fall when we get to that point, but the same basic rules apply. If you get a lot of questions right, you're going to get a good score. you get a lot of questions wrong, you're going to get a bad score, and it's still going to be out of 1600. So, but some people I think are going to find that they like that format better because it's shorter and it's digital, and all kids were raised on iPads these days. Other people might not like that format. They might like the longer paper format where it's easier to like write everything down and flip around and stuff like that. Why not take them both? In fact, that's going to be my advice in a minute here for SAT versus ACT is why not take them both and just see which one you do better on. You can always not submit it. So sophomores, if we're about to be juniors, consider that. Think about taking the test a little bit early in the fall of your junior year, and then again in the spring of your junior year with a different format. Use whichever one you do better on. Before I get to the SAT versus ACT, somebody asked, do colleges look at the weighted GPA or unweighted GPA? It depends on the school. You usually submit both. Remember that weighted versus unweighted. Unweighted means that it's just literally the GPA that you got. So if you have like a 3.0 because you got mostly B's, some A's, some C's, that's your unweighted GPA. But if some of those B's were in AP classes, they're actually harder, and so they're worth a little bit more than 3.0, and so maybe that 3.0 raises up to a weighted 3.4, which is how you can get a GPA that's higher than a 4.0. Some people have like crazy high GPAs of like 4.5 or something. That's because they got all A's, so they have a 4.0, but then a lot of them were also APs, so they're worth like 5.0 and stuff like that. Depends on the school. Some schools have a lot of AP classes. In fact, some schools will even weight their honors classes. Well, that's not fair. If a kid can have like 30 weighted classes, yeah, but the colleges know that. So, to get a 4.7 at Peninsula, not really that big a thing because they weight every class ever. You can walk to school and get a 5.0 just for getting there on time. So they know that. You bet. If you want to get into UCLA, if you go to any school, you probably better have, a 4.2 or something. But if you go to a school with a lot of grade weighting, you better have like a 5.1. So it depends. Thank you, Karen, for answering that. Somebody asked, where can we sign up for the SAT or the ACT? You do it at their websites. The SAT at collegeboard.com, I think is the website, and ACT.org or ACTstudent.org. Or you can just Google sign up for SAT, and chances are the first hit result will take you there. Okay, now, should you consider the ACT? What is that? Well, it's the Pepsi to the SAT's Coke. Oh, I love Pepsi. I hate Coke. Okay, cool. Most people can't tell the difference between the two flavors. Some people swear by one or the other. Make sure that you are thinking in terms of what test you might do better on, but many people don't know. And so that's why many students just try both. Colleges are going to use whichever one you do better on. Like, let's make another dumb sports analogy here. Let's pretend you're in the Olympics and you're trying to win the gold medal in the long jump contest. And you show up and the judges say, hey, you got a choice. Here's our track. You run down the track and then you jump. And you can do that. Or you can do that, and then when you're done, you can come over here to this other track. This one, it's basically the same thing. The running space is a little bit different material, and the jumping board is a little bit like bouncier. Some people don't like it though, because it messes up their stride. Other people think they jump further on it. You can also jump on this one if you want, and then we'll just use whichever one you get a better distance on. So what's it going to be? Would you want to jump once, or would you want to jump twice? Why would you not jump twice? Why would you not run down both tracks and see which one works better and then use that one? Now, that's the logic between trying both tests. Some people have a counter argument. They say, I already tried both. I took a practice test and I was way better at the ACT. Cool. Then just focus on that track. You don't have to do them both. You don't have to jump down both tracks. There are no rules saying you do, even for schools that require it. Any school that requires the SAT or ACT or accepts the SAT or ACT will accept the other one. Now, there are some differences between the tests, and that does clue some people in towards which one they like. This will change again when we get to the digital format, but based on the current format, the ACT is already way more questions. It is the fast test. In fact, look at this. They have 215 questions in 3 hours flat. The SAT gives you 5 more minutes to do 61 fewer questions. Oh my God, that is so much faster on the ACT. How can they get away with that? Well, here's how. The questions on the ACT are much more straightforward. It's like doing a whole page of multiplication problems from 3rd grade versus doing 3 algebra questions. Oh, I'd rather just do 3 questions. I don't care that they're a little bit more advanced. All right, then you might be an SAT person, because the questions, yes, they are a little trickier. They're a little more evil, a little more multi-layered. No, I'd rather do the really simple questions. I don't mind that there's more of them. Okay, cool. If you like going fast, you like simpler questions, maybe you're an ACT person. The other big difference is the amount of math that is tested. And although the SAT is about to be even shorter, so if you really only want to take a short test with not that many questions on it, that'll be even more true with the digital version. They're still going to test half of your score based on math, though, on the SAT, versus the ACT only gives you a quarter of your score based on. So, anybody in here kind of hate math? Because if you hate math, you should definitely take the ACT. There is much less math on the ACT. You should take that test. If, on the other hand, you love math and you're hoping your math can make up for not such a great verbal score, then you should take the SAT. But Paul, I don't really like math or verbal. I don't like going fast or doing tricky questions. Well, a lot of schools are still test optional these days. So think about, what might be best for you, both in terms of, which test might be better, which test should you take at all, when should you take it? And that's something that each person usually has their own individual answer. I don't really see any harm in at least trying a practice test. Even if you don't do it with me, just take one on your own, or maybe you just want to take one section of the SAT versus one section of the ACT, score them and see how it goes, and then decide, is this something that's going to help your GPA and so forth. That can really help, optimize your college application package. You've heard colleges are getting more competitive. That's only true of like the really competitive ones, by the way. There's still 1,400 colleges, 2/3 of which accept 2/3 of their applicants. So you can get into a bunch of schools like already. You're here on a Monday night on a Zoom in June. You're going to college. Don't worry, you're going to be fine. But no, I want to get into more colleges or fancier colleges, or I want to get into everyone I apply to. All right, well, optimize your package by at least seeing if an SAT or an ACT can help you. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next page here, but I'll go through this really briefly because there's a lot of data on this page, and I want to get to some tips for you guys here. This page has, and this is, you really got to take this page with a grain of salt, I should say, because there's so much data here, and also this really depends on a lot of other things. But this is my general range of like who might consider taking the test, and the short answer is basically, if you think you're going to score, 1,200 or higher, you should definitely take the SAT. Like, that can only help you. Even if you have a really high GPA, it's just another validator. Sometimes people are like, well, my GPA is kind of right in the middle of my, school that I'm applying to, but my SAT score is also kind of right in the middle. I would say still use it, because you're also forgetting that so many people are just not submitting a score at all. And I know they're not supposed to assume anything about you if you don't submit a score, but there's just something about like a 4.0 GPA that has a 1,500 along with it versus a 4.0 GPA that doesn't have any test score associated with it at all. Like, they're not supposed to assume that means you got a 900, but you never know what's operating in their subconscious. So I would say if you think you're going to score, or you take a PSAT or a practice test and you get, even anywhere north of 1,000, you could probably bring that score up 200 points. A 1,200 is a really solid score, so I'd probably consider the test in that case. I would also consider the score almost always if your GPA is anything lower than like a 3.5, because 3.5 is a really good GPA. It's going to get you into half of the schools in the country, but there are going to be a certain cohort of schools that they're just never going to consider a 3.5 just because they have so many 3.9s and 4.0s applying. It's just hard for them to take you unless it comes with a 1,300 SAT score. Suddenly 3.5 means something a lot different in that case. So you might need something to help supercharge. Now, if you fall into this range here where you took the PSAT and you got an 850, and you have a 4.0, like, yeah, don't waste your time. Like you probably were going to get into Georgetown anyway. But by the way, it doesn't mean you should give up. Still apply there. You never know. But that probably means that your GPA is going to be carrying the weight anyway. So in that range, or again, if you're only applying to UCs, think about that. And again, this GPA, you really have to consider this really based on your class rank, because at some schools a 4.0 is extremely high. Like if there aren't many AP schools at your school, then you might have to crank this whole thing down a little bit, because the 3.0 is actually still pretty good if there is no weighting at your school. Or again, if you go to Peninsula, you're going to crank this up a little bit because the 3.9 is not very good there. That's like getting C's basically. So I would think more in terms of your class rank, perhaps. Like maybe this is actually better if you're in the top 5% of your class and you got an 850 on your PSAT. Don't bother. But anyway, too much information on here, but this is something you guys can look at as well if you need more influencing. Okay, let me take you guys to some tips here. I'd like to spend 10-15 minutes talking about some ways that you can actually score higher on these things, give you guys some useful data. And then we'll open this up to Q&A at the end. First, a couple general tips here, guys, just to help you in general. There's some really easy stuff that you can do to immediately raise your score 100 points without having to worry too much about it, not even having to think any harder, in fact, doing less work. Rule number one, and I hope you all know this anyway, but guys, there's no penalty for guessing on these tests anymore. There used to be a penalty on the SAT where we'd actually lose 1/4 of a point, but that got rid of that back in 2016. So these days, guess on every single question. That doesn't mean you have to do every single question. Sometimes some of the math questions are just too hard, or one of the reading passages is just too boring. Fine, you don't have to do it, but you should still bubble B, 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 B. There's nothing that's worse than somebody who like only got halfway through a section and then left a bunch of blanks. You're just giving away free points. Here's my analogy. Let's say that you have, you're on a weird game show, and on this game show, you're ushered into this room where there's all these different cakes on the table. Now, on this table are 60 different size cakes. We use 60 because that's how many math questions there are on the ACT and roughly how many there are on the SAT. And these cakes are, each one is worth $10. So the game is eat as many cakes as you can. You have an hour or an hour and a half. You're going to just eat cakes, and you're going to get paid money for every cake that you can eat. Now, two things. First, these cakes are not all the same sizes. And the fact, the way the math sections on both tests work is that there are easy questions at the beginning of the math section, then they get a little harder, and then at the end, the questions are quite hard. They're all worth the same amount of points, though. Every cake is worth $10. So if the cakes in the front of the table are little miniature cupcakes, and the ones in the back of the table are huge, like a birthday cake or a 10-layer wedding cake, where are you going to start? Aren't you going to start with the cupcakes? Like, guzzle those little ones, eat those easy math problems until they're gone, then deal with the medium ones, and then maybe you just ignore the ones at the end of the table because, you know, that last math question, that big wedding cake, that's just going to give you a stomachache. Now, you should still guess on it. And in our increasingly abstract analogy, guessing is the equivalent to like, wait till the judge isn't looking and then throw the cake out the window. Like maybe there's 20 cakes that are too hard for you to eat. You're like, I'm full. I ate 40 of them. I'm going to throw up. I'm done. You take the other ones. Judges aren't looking. You throw them out the window. Now the judges are like, wait a minute. There's cakes out here. You threw 10 cakes out the window. I'm not giving you credit for those. And you're like, yo, I threw 20 out the window. They didn't even notice them. When you guess B on a bunch of questions, sometimes the answer is B. And you're picking up 10 SAT points every time you guess and get it right. So maybe you're really lucky to pick up a lot of points. Oh, hold on, I got to mute another person here. But maybe you are, unlucky and you're only picking up a few. Any ones that you guess luckily on, you're getting extra points. So when I see a bubble sheet that's halfway filled out, I'm like, that's 200 points that you had that you just threw away. You didn't want those points. That's like working a full shift and then not turning in your timesheet and so you don't get paid. What a waste. Guess, please guess. Some people just like to go B, 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 B. Other people like to make a cool design. Other people are like, my name starts with A, and so that's my lucky letter. Whatever. I don't care how you guess, but don't leave them blank for the love of God. Even if you can't do some of them, you should still guess wildly. Now, there are tricks that you can use to guess more accurately. Here's a really easy one. On the grammar section, the writing section as it's known on the SAT. In this passage, if you're ever stuck between two choices, and it doesn't really help on these two questions because they're not good examples of this, but pick the shortest answer. They test brevity. Brevity means we like shorter answers. Don't say the ball was thrown by me when you can say I threw the ball. So pick the shortest answer. If you don't get finished with the writing section, move through the ends, the ones at the end, and be like, which one's literally the shortest answer? Circle that. It's not always going to be right, but it'll be right more than its fair share of the time. On the reading section, the more generic and vague sounding an answer is, the better. The more specific and detailed it is, the worse. So look for those generic ones like an unexpected event, rather than this passage is about how John got his favorite kind of chocolate from the store. It's too detailed, it's too specific. That's probably wrong. On the math, the answer that looks the most like the other answers is more likely to be right. So if the answers are like 1, 8, 9, and 1,000, well, don't pick 1,000, because if 1,000 was the answer, what kind of garbage wrong answer traps are 1, 8, and 9? Who would pick those? It's probably not 1 either. It's probably 8 or 9. Well, which one? I don't know. I haven't read the question, but you can guess more accurately a little bit just by guessing wisely. So guess on every single question, skip around, find the easy cakes. By the way, that dumb math cake analogy also applies to the reading. Let's say that you're reading your ACT's reading section and you're like, man, 4 passages, I only have 35 minutes. I don't have time to read all 4 of these and answer 10 questions about each one. That's too hard. Then whichever one is the most boring, the passage that kills your soul even to just look at it, don't do that one. Slow down and try to do a good job on 3 of them, and then guess B, 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 B on that 4th one. You'll probably score higher than you would have if you'd rushed and still not done very well because you're in such a rush. Now, there's also very strict rules about the way that they write the right and wrong, the right and wrong answer choices. That actually was correct, as bad as that sounded. I do want you to remember that there is 1 right answer choice and 3 or 4 wrong answer choices, meaning that whenever you get a question, you're like, oh, I don't know, a bunch of these seem right. No, they're not. They're all wrong except 1. It might only be 1 word that's wrong. It might not be very obviously wrong, but there is something wrong with it. So think in terms of the ways that they write the wrong answer choices. And if you can't figure out which one's right, know that 3 of them at least are wrong, and you should scratch out as many as you can. So to demonstrate that, let's actually do a little passage here. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to share with you a couple of the most common wrong answer types on the SAT and ACT. Let's look at this passage here. I'm going to try to read this to you as well as write at the same time. And so here we go. Daily life is overflowing with mundane mental events. A paperclip gleams amidst stacks of documents. A friend's face shines like a beacon out of a crowd. A smell of freshly baked bread evokes childhood memories. Thoughts and perceptions such as these flow by with monotonous ease. So we got overflowing, we got flow. So it seems anyway. Yet, turn signal word here. Given what scientists know about how our brains work, even the ability to perceive a paperclip on a messy desk represents an extraordinary and mysterious achievement. Okay, so when you get a passage, the first step with the reading section is to try to get the main idea. That's our goal. We want to get the main idea out of the passage. If I had to summarize this, I would say something about how, like, perception seems easy, but it's actually pretty cool that our brains can do that. But wow, exclamation point, wow. Okay, so then if they ask me a question about this, I want to think about my answer perhaps before I dive in. In our first paragraph, the author implicitly likens our experience of sensory impressions. Whoa, slow down there, nerdlinger. Sometimes you have to like reread these 1 or 2 times before they make much sense. First paragraph, by the way, that means that anything in the second paragraph is now off limits. So we're looking at the first paragraph. The author implicitly likens. What does that mean? You mean like compares? So like the author compares our experience of sensory. What do you mean sensory impressions? You mean like seeing a paperclip? It's friend's face, smell of bread. What's he comparing them to? I don't know. He's just saying that they're like, no big deal. You don't have to write your prediction, but it's not a bad idea to think of what kind of prediction you might be looking for. That saves you from getting sucked into their traps. Basically, we're looking for an answer that says no big deal. Now, what makes the SAT so hard, in fact, sometimes harder than the ACT, sometimes the ACT will have an answer that more or less says no big deal. The SAT loves disguising their answers, and maybe you don't really see any of these that you love. Then we go through and we start eliminating. And I want to share with you guys a couple of different types of wrong answer choices that we see over and over again on these tests that you can eliminate. The first thing is called the never said that. That's when something, I don't know, sounds possibly reasonable, but well, I guess technically they never said that. Then cross it off. It's wrong. If this answer choice said the sky is blue, I would say no, wrong, because they never talked about the sky in this passage. But the sky is blue. Nuh-uh, not in the passage, is not. Show me where in the passage it said the sky is blue. Well, okay, I guess technically they never said that, but it's right. No, then cross it off. You're done now. As soon as it says never said that, you are finished. That is a wrong answer. Another one is too extreme. That's when they take the right answer and they push it a little bit too far. And this first answer choice is both of these. They never really said anything about emotional, paperclip, friend's face. Oh, but I might see my friend, and if I'm happy, I might get them. They never said emotional, though. Childhood memories, those don't have to be emotional. You could just be like, oh, I remember that time that I walked to the store. Okay, yeah, cool. So emotional is they never said that. That ruins this one already. And even if it wasn't already wrong, roller coaster ruins it further by being very extreme. Even if you were like, but childhood memories, maybe that's like a sad childhood memory. Was it like suicidally sad or ecstatically happy? Because a roller coaster is what that conveys. And no, none of that is here. So those are signs of wrong answer choices. The third one is what we would call out of scope. That's where they say, hey, what's the main idea of paragraph 1? And then they give you something from paragraph 2. So some people look at C and they're like, oh yeah, image, I like that. But when they talk about a repeated image, first of all, nothing was repeated. And if somebody's like, no, but they repeated paperclip, well, that's off limits. It's from the wrong paragraph. And so that is a way that they ask you a big question and try to give you a little answer, and that, goofs it up on you. So beware of those tricks. They always like to try to trap you on those. Unobstructed stream, a lot of people read that answer and they're like, huh? What does that even say? There's nothing wrong, by the way, with saying, I don't know what that answer says. I'm going to skip it for now. Why don't we just leave B alone? Because it's hard to even tell what that says. Some people like nostalgic reminiscence. I'll come back to that one. We'll say maybe for that as well. Diverting daydream feels like it kind of falls into the too extreme and never said that categories. Where was the daydream? And where was it so diverting that what, you crash your car into a tree because you're busy thinking about a paperclip? I don't think they went there. So if you ever find yourself saying, well, maybe, oh, but I don't think they actually said that, well, then get rid of it because it's already. There's a very strict rule set to this, guys. Even though this test seems arbitrary sometimes, there's very strict rules on what makes answers right or wrong. Now, unobstructed stream, very confusing. Nostalgic reminiscence, some people like, but I would ask you to examine what exactly these words mean. Isn't a reminiscence a memory? Sure, like this memory, okay, that's supported. But what about the paperclip gleams in the present tense? That's not a memory. Friend's face shines in the present tense. That's not a memory. And even if it was a memory, a nostalgic reminiscence, like, oh, I remember that paperclip. We used to spend such great times together attaching papers to one another. Oh. No, this is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous answer. Get rid of this one too. And I know you didn't like it, but that's the SAT for you. They love picking the one that's not a particularly good looking answer, but guys, it's not wrong. Stream. What does a stream do? It flows. And you know what a stream doesn't have? Obstructions. Where were the obstructions to this person's line of perception. Oh, I guess really there weren't any. Yeah, there weren't any, so it's an unobstructed stream. But I just don't like B. Irrelevant. I don't care if you like it or not. It's the only one that is not wrong. And sometimes flipping the test on its head and not worrying about which one you do like, instead focusing on which one you don't like and killing all of those, that is a better route to success on the reading passages of these tests. All right, I'll go much faster here through this writing one here. There are two types of questions on the writing. First, they test grammar stuff like connectors, verbs, brevity, pronouns. And that's what 75% of the questions are here. So although we do read this, we don't need to take as much time and attention as we do with the other one. It's called Bilbo Swede, Labor Patriot. The autobiography of Ben Ellen Swede is littered with inaccuracies. Swede even fudges the date of his own birth. He incorrectly lists July 4th, Independence Day, and makes himself younger by 15 years. Okay, the one rule I want to teach you here, guys, is how semicolons work. You need to know how semicolons work for the SAT and the ACT. They freaking love semicolons so much. I don't even, well, I do know why. It's because you're supposed to know them and most kids don't. And so it's a great way for them to make you get questions wrong. A semicolon is super easy though, guys. A semicolon is just a period. It is interchangeable with a period. Charles Dickens might not like that explanation, but technically in modern English, that is the way it works. So if you ever see a semicolon, ask yourself, is the thing before it and after it a complete sentence? Wait, this isn't a complete sentence. You can't start with incorrectly listing. Yeah, then C is eliminated. Wait, this is a colon, incorrectly listing July 4th. Wait, would you pause there? No, the other thing that a semicolon or colon do are pauses, and you wouldn't want to pause there. This third example, or this B example, is our right answer here, because here we have a semicolon separating one complete sentence, one independent clause from another. That works here. B is our answer. And the reason that A doesn't work is not because of a semicolon, but it's because they're trying to make a comma do what a semicolon does, what a period does. Here's another rule, guys. Commas must never separate two complete sentences. Semicolons always connect two complete sentences. Commas never separate two complete sentences. There are not very many grammar rules you need to know for the ACT. In fact, there are only 7 grammar things that they test. And then there's one other miscellaneous type of question I'll get to in a second. But if you can learn how connectors like semicolons and colons work, you can learn how verbs work, pronouns. Guess what? It refers to one rock. They refers to multiple rocks. They fell on my head, or it fell on my head. How many rocks were there? That's kind of all pronouns are in the test, and so forth. And the brevity thing, that's half of them right there. It's just the usual suspects, same ones over and over and over again. Now, occasionally, on about 1 out of 4 questions, they mix it up on you. They throw you a curveball. Here, let's keep reading. These details, however, matter little because autobiography is not about Bilbo Swede. He became famous for his work when Swede got involved in the American labor movement in the 1930s. Now, notice this question has something different going on. They got this intro text. They're saying, given that all these are true, what's the best transition into the rest of the essay? I no longer care about grammar. This is called an assignment question. And they are going to just ask me, hey, based on the rest of the essay that is about the labor movement in a passage called Labor Patriot, which one should go here? This one where he's born in Chicago? No, I don't care where he was born. Born in Nebraska, actually. I want to know the one about, the labor leader guy. This is a different type of question. This is not about grammar. So even though this section is about 75% grammar, you do need to keep your head on a swivel and be able to occasionally turn your attention to non-grammar questions and throw something else out there as well. Okay, if you guys can bear with me, I have one more question and then we're going to open this up to QA. This one's a math one, this one's a fun one, because my favorite thing about the math on the SAT and the ACT is that you don't really need to use the math all the time. There are a bunch of really sweet magic tricks that you can do to get questions right when you do not know how to do the math. Now, if you were in my prep course or something, I would say, all right, well, here is the math way to do it. But if you don't like that way, here's this other weapon you can kill the bad guy with. But I love these in the seminars because it's just a great example of like, Wait, but I don't know how to do synthetic division or division of polynomials or whatever the hell the math is involved here. I don't know how to do this. That's fine. Let's do it a different wacky cheat way. We're going to use a strategy here that I call, well, everybody calls this make up numbers. I'm just going to pretend that X is 1. Now, a lot of people see this and they're like, well, there's X, but wait, Paul, how do you know that X is 1? How do you know it isn't? Well, couldn't it be 2? Sure, but couldn't it be 1? Okay. So wait, I can just make up any number I want as long as they say it's allowed. If they said that like X has to be an odd number, then you can't pick 2, but yeah, you can pick 1 here. All we do when we see an algebra problem where we're stuck and we're confused and we don't know what to do is we make up a number. Okay, well, what do we do then? Step 2 is you plug it in. Let's just take 1 and plug it in here and see what happens. If you take 1 and plug it in here, multiply it by 5, subtract 2, you're going to get 3. And on the bottom, you're going to get 1 plus 3 is 4. So you would get 3/4. Now, let me make sure we're clear here before I go on to the third and final step here, guys. Did I have to pick 1? No, I could have picked anything I want. I could have picked X is 19, but I don't love pain. I picked X1 because it's easy. Step 2, I could have picked something else, but if I picked X1, does everyone agree that this would be 3/4? If I had picked X was 5, it'd be something different. Don't really care though. If X is 1, this is 3/4. All I need to do now is I plug this same X into my answer choices. And whichever of these comes out to be 3/4 is my right answer. The other ones are wrong. Now, some of these don't even have an X in them. So I don't even need to plug in X at all. I just take 5 minus 2 is 3, and that equals 3/3. Well, that's not 3/4. Yeah, so A is wrong. A is now eliminated. This one is 5 minus what, some chump change here. 5 minus 2/3, isn't that what, 4 1/3? That's nowhere close to 3/4. 4/3 or 3/4, like a really small number. This is like 5 minus not much. No, that's not my answer either. By the way, I kind of didn't like A and B anyway, because like, where'd the X go? But that's another reason they're wrong. And C is going to be the same problem. C, I do have an X, so I plug this in and I do 5 minus 2/4, or 5 minus 1/2. Isn't that 4 1/2? That's not 3/4. I need something that comes out to be 3/4. So unless I did something wrong, this must be my answer. Let's check to make sure. If I take 1 for X and I plug it in here, I get 5 minus 17/4. And just to make this 5 work a little better with my subtraction, I'm going to change it to 20/4. Is everybody okay that like 5 is the same as 20/4? Guess what 20/4 minus 17/4 is? No way. Oh yeah, it does match. Okay, and that's how I know that D is my right answer. Wait, hold on. Are you saying that D will work no matter what number I make up? Uh-huh, I am saying that, because if these really are equivalent, you have to be able to put in the same input and get the same output. Lots of nerdy algebra people reason rules why this works, but you can also just trust me. This is a great cheat for getting through problems that you do not know how to do. Some math problems, you got to know a little bit of math on. But a lot of them, there are some weird workarounds where you can shorten or simplify or chop the problem down to size or something, and it makes it way easier. So know the concepts or know the tricks, guys. But most importantly, know that these tests are just full of strategies like this. So when you get to the improvement part and you're practicing, guys, remember improvement's got 3 parts. Yeah, we want to do practice questions. Yes, you want to take practice sections and practice, tests and stuff and so forth. But then you got to review your mistakes so that you can learn from these mistakes. Because whether it's a math concept you didn't know, a grammar rule you didn't spot, or a wrong answer type you didn't notice, you're going to see these same basic questions again. That's what standardized means. Standardized means the same test every time, because schools aren't standardized against each other. The whole reason these tests exist is to give colleges something else. And another something else you can get out of this is the creativity to see how this all works. Okay, guys. I'm going to open this up to Q&A, but first, real quickly, if you need more information about the tests or us or what we do, again, I am Paul Jury from PJ Test Prep. You can reach me here. You can always email me or call me if you have any questions. You can also ask questions in the chat. We do teach prep courses as long as other stuff. Thank you, Karen. Yes, I will send you the recording when it is ready. But there are also classes that we do. We have a $500 SAT prep course over the summer that gets you ready for August or September. There's other ones in the fall. We have a $195 crash course. If you think this stuff is good, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We also tutor for academic tutoring, science, math, English, stuff like that. If you're just sucking at chemistry and need some help, look us up. If you've liked any of the stuff that you have heard, there's more of it. But this is not some big sales pitchy thing. This is mostly just some scheduling and information about us. Look us up. Oh, if you're a senior, we do a summer essay workshop too. Oh, unfortunately, the early bird price has expired, but the regular price is not much more than this. If you want to just bang these essays out, we have that too. Anyway, that's some stuff about us. Take a look at this handout or any of the stuff, or just check out our website when you get a chance. But can I open this up to any questions? Is there anything I didn't ask? What about super scores? Somebody asked. Great question. What are super scores, and can I use them at most schools? What a super score is, guys, is when you take the SAT or sometimes the ACT more than once. Let's say that you did really good on your math one time, and then the next time not so good, but you did really good on your verbal. Technically, with the super score, you combine your best math score from one sitting with your best verbal score from another, and that's your new score, even though if you never actually got that score in a single sitting. Now, the good thing about super scores is it can make your score higher than you actually ever achieved. The downside is, of course, so can everybody else. And so colleges sometimes do this because it allows them to pad their stats a little bit. You can use them if you want. I would just say submit any high scores that you have to a school. If you scored similarly on 2 different occasions, one was a little higher and your super score helps you a little, I don't think they're going to be like, oh, well, this time they only got a 1250. The other time they got a 1270. We're rejecting them now. They might look at them together and say, hey, 1290. Yeah, we're going to assume that's what the kid's really capable of. So I would say generally just submit your good scores. That usually means super scoring. Unless there's some really compelling reason not to. But yeah, super scores can be helpful. What else? And for those who are ducking out, thank you guys so much again for coming. You can always just look up my information here on the website. Does anyone have any other questions? To recap briefly, yes, at least give these tests a shot, at least in a free practice test of some kind, and see if it'll help you. You can also just simply Google. Let's say you really want to go to, I don't know, Pepperdine, Google Pepperdine average SAT score, Pepperdine average GPA. And if you're like, oh, my GPA is way higher than their average. Oh, but my SAT is way lower than their average. Well, if you can get that SAT score up a bit, you might still use it, but maybe you wouldn't submit in that case. But if your GPA is on the middle to lower side, you're going to need something to help raise that score, to raise those numbers, maybe an SAT score. Somebody asked, is it harmful to submit a less than favorable score? There's a lot of gray area in that question, but the short, unambiguous answer is, yeah, don't submit a bad score. If you think you're in the running for a school based on your GPA alone, and your SAT score is substantially lower than the score that the school is looking for, don't submit it. It is only going to hurt you. They might say, oh, well, we did like this kid, but I don't know, this GPA might have got him in, but the score, no. Now, on the other hand, if you're not sure about your score, but you know that your GPA is a little on the low side, bro, you got to throw some kind of Hail Mary out there. So, if you're sure that your SAT score is really low and really bad, okay, that probably isn't it. But, if you're borderline, throw it out there. Like, why not? You never know how many kids who had lower than 1100 never submitted your score. I know people don't think 1100 is super high, but it is significantly above average. Maybe that's what the thing that pushes you over. So get some advice on this, have a counselor or have me look at your numbers and tell you. But I would say if you're unsure, err on the side of submitting it. But yeah, if it's truly harmful for your GPA, don't submit that. You have to pay for your score to be submitted to multiple colleges. Generally, you have to pay about $10 to get your score officially sent to a college. So in the grand scheme of $65,000 a year, $10 isn't too much. But Yes, you do technically have to pay for different schools unless you get fee waivers or unless with your actual SAT, you put down a couple of schools, they will automatically send your school out usually to 4 schools for free. So you can get 4 free ones that way. But if later you got to send it out to other schools, you just pay the $10 and have it sent out. Other questions? One last question people give me is, what should I be doing with my summer? Well, if you are about to be a senior, I think I've answered that question already. If you are a junior, you could do some, or if you're going to be a junior next year, you could do some test prep in the thought of taking the tests before they flip over to the new format. You don't necessarily have to. If you're younger than that, don't freak out about test prep. If like you're just going to be a sophomore next year, you don't need to take the SAT as a sophomore. There's no reason for it. Read books, do some math worksheets, and just enrich yourself. Go have fun. You're a kid. So don't stress about these things more than you have to. And honestly, even if you are planning to be very serious about the test and you're like, oh, I'm applying to, very selective colleges, I need a top score. I think if you're going to be a sophomore next year, you're better off improving your SAT score by reading a lot of books that you enjoy this summer and making sure your math fundamentals are strong than doing a whole bunch of practice tests. Wait till next year for that. You'll have time. So these tests don't need to be something that haunt your dreams. My biggest complaint with our current college picture is suddenly the stress level about GPA has gone through the roof. Now, suddenly, if you ever got an A-, there's no way you're going to UCLA, and that's just too damn bad. Why should that stress be 4 years? Yeah, I know the SAT can be stressful, but for like 2 months, stress for 2 months and then chill a little bit. You can get an A-. You used to be able to get an A- and go to UCLA if you had a decent SAT score. Nowadays, you have to go to USC instead. By the way, if you ever got an A-, but you have a good test score, USC is your school now. Go Trojans. So anyway, not to be so dire because again, you can get into most schools in the country. Just certain UCs are so hard to get into. Yes, you can submit both ACT and SAT scores if you've submitted them. I went to Northwestern. I didn't know which one was higher. My SAT was a little higher because I missed like 3 questions on the verbal and none on the math, and I missed slightly more than that on my ACT. So I sent them both in, and they were like, "Sure, yeah, whatever. You're good at tests," which is good because, by the way, my GPA was not ready to go to Northwestern. I probably had the lowest GPA of anybody to ever attend that school, but sometimes these tests can save you. Yeah, submit them both if they're comparable. But if you do have a noticeably higher SAT or ACT score than the other, submit the higher one. Ignore the lower one. Any other questions, you guys? All right, well, forgive my gravelly voice. I am a little sick here, so it's good we're not doing this in person. But thank you guys all so much for coming. Again, I'm Paul Jury. We are PJ Test Prep. Look me up online if you have questions. If you want to join me in one of my classes, I teach most of them myself. You can sign up right on our website. I thank you guys so much. Stick around if you have other questions. Otherwise, we'll see ya. Thank you guys too. And again, yeah, if you have a question about like your particular score, you can ask about that. But I'm going to stop the recording here.